Well, after an awesome weekend of racing, we have plenty of things to discuss as we had action from both Atlanta Motor Speedway and Mid-Ohio. We're going to be talking about Parker Kligerman breaking through and getting a huge win in the Truck Series, as well as Austin Hill and Chase Elliott coming through, getting big home track wins at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And of course, we will be discussing Ross Chastain mixing it up yet again with Denny Hamlin, as well as ruffling up a few more feathers along the way. We have all this to discuss and more on this episode of 3 Wide. So starting out the race weekend, while the Cup Series and Xfinity Series were racing over at Atlanta, the Truck Series had made their way to Mid-Ohio to race on the road course. You had Corey Heim and Parker Kligerman starting on row one. You also had Justin Marks making his first start in any of the three series since 2018. Now, he had one at Mid-Ohio back in 2016 when he was driving for Chip Ganassi in the Xfinity Series. So it's been a while since he's been in any type of competitive race for NASCAR, but it was great to see him back in. I kind of like seeing a Cup car owner being able to go and drive in the Truck Series just to have some fun. But the battle for the race win most of the day was between Zane Smith and Parker Kligerman. They swapped stage wins between stage one and two. And coming into the race, Zane, he was a pretty heavy favorite for the race. In the two road courses that they've run this season, he won at Coda in Texas and finished second at Sonoma. So he's definitely a good road course driver. And then you have Parker Kligerman, who was another top truck. He had only had one top five in all of his road course races in the Truck Series, and that was just last year with a fifth place at Watkins Glen. But it was still, you could tell Parker was probably one of the better trucks. Zane was right there with him for most of the run. And you had a restart late in the race with 9 laps to go. Zane, he was able to get the lead from Parker. Corey Heim was able to follow through for second place. But then Corey, he lost his transmission going in towards the end, wound up stopping on the track and causing a caution. And this set up a pretty exciting sprint to the finish with green flag fell with 3 laps to go. And it was an excellent battle between Parker and Zane. It was a good, clean battle. They were racing each other hard, but Zane wasn't doing anything to use them up or knock them out of the way, even though he had more than enough opportunities to do so. So for the Truck Series, it was nice to see a battle kind of play out like that, where nobody was really using their bumper or getting in over their head. And Parker would hang on for the win and he would lead 56 of the 67 laps, and it was his first win since 2017 when he won for that 75 team at Talladega. Parker finished first. You had Zane Smith second. Carson Hocevar was third, followed by Stuart Friesen in fourth. Christian Eckes, he finished in fifth, followed by Chandler Smith in sixth. Kaz Gralla, he was able to finish in seventh, followed by Derek Kraus in eighth. Colby Howard finished in ninth, and Haley Deegan was able to come away with a solid 10th place finish. And with the battle at the end, it really showed Zane's maturity. Whereas most other drivers, say if there would have been a Derek Kraus behind them, maybe one of the Thor Sport drivers, probably would have been a little bit more aggressive than Zane was. Zane has a couple wins already on the season, so his playoff spot secured, and drove Parker really clean. That's going to definitely get a lot of respect for him throughout the garage area, even for some in the Xfinity or the Cup Series. I'm sure they were paying attention to that. And with this race, finally Parker breaks through and gets the win. He's had probably his strongest run with this 75 truck in his part-time starts as this season. Shows that he is very deserving of a full-time ride. This kind of was the sum of all of his runs. And he had mentioned in a post-race press conference that they're trying to get, funding to run full-time next year, which to me, if they are able to get that funding, I hope they do. You definitely would have to put Parker as a favorite for not only the playoffs, but for the championship, just because he's had so many strong runs. He's shown he's capable of doing it, just hasn't had many opportunities in his career. And, I'm all for it. Just mainly the Truck Series is in bad need of many stronger teams. Of course, you got Kyle Busch Motorsports. Their trucks are always strong. Front Row Motorsports, they've really come on in the past year and a half, especially with Zane. Surely they're going to continue to try and compete to that level. Outside of that, I mean, you got Thor Sport, who, they'll get a few wins every season. They do have some consistent runs. Outside of that, I mean, Nice Motorsports, they've only really had one competitive truck out of all of their teams, and that's been Carson. It's just not the strongest field as far as teams go in the truck series. So anytime a team can come in, inject some life in that series, put some more attention to it, is definitely a positive. Swapping over, talking about the point situation, they only have one more race before their playoffs start, and that is Pocono here in a couple weeks. The main battle at the cut line is a battle between Matt Crafton and Derek Kraus. And Derek, he's just been slowly chipping away at that points difference. And he was able to make up a good bit of difference today. Matt, he got spun out there at the end with around 3 to go after that final restart. Derek, he was able to get a solid 8th place finish and was able to close his point gap coming into the race. He had a 29-point gap between him and a playoff spot held by Matt Crafton. After this race, he was able to gain 10 points, and so now he's down minus 19. So going into Pocono, it is possible he could make it on points if Matt is unable to win. But for Derek, he's going to need a lot of help. He's going to have to go for as many points as he can each stage, even if he can get a stage win, and hope that Matt runs into some trouble and is not able to, get those points in the stages and not come away with a solid finish, much like he did at Mid-Ohio. So outside of that, somebody, for anybody else below Derek in the points to get in the playoffs, they are going to have to win. I mean, and just looking at the drivers below the cut line, I don't know if anybody, nobody has shown really the speed or consistency to get it done. And going back to Justin before we wrap up talking about the trucks, he was having a decent day running in the top 15, top 10 area, and wound up getting spun by Derek coming out of one of the corners. And from there, he goes into one of the corners, not too much longer later, and pretty much said his brake pedal just went straight to the floor. And instead of, he very well could have taken out the truck in front of him, he was able to kind of stay on that truck's outside, slide through the gravel, and slam pretty hard passenger side into the tire barrier. So some heads up driving for him to be able to avoid that truck. Luckily, there was that gravel pit there to scrub some speed off, but just glad to see him get out, walk off. And in his his interview after the wreck, he said he had a pretty fun time. So I don't know if we'll see him make any more starts. He kind of made it sound like he's just going to leave it to professionals here on out. So who knows? It was still fun to see him get back behind the wheel. So moving back down south for the Xfinity Series, they were at Atlanta Motor Speedway Saturday. And the big question coming into this weekend's race was, how was the racing going to look compared to the racing in March? Racing in July, obviously, it's going to be hotter temperatures, hotter track, slicker track conditions for the drivers. And the answer to those questions came pretty quick. The drivers, they were a lot more spread out in this race compared to the spring. They were, the leaders would be able to get away in a 7 to 8 car pack and really single file racing. Passing seemed to, be tougher to obtain, even with the runs that they would get. And the Xfinity cars, they seem to be a lot more aero dependent. You would see guys like Sheldon Creed, he stepped out. I don't know whether it was to get air on his nose or what, and he kind of got a little too high. He was loose beforehand already, and he just lost it and spun out. And that was, you'd see Xfinity drivers really struggling, with being loose. If they got out of line or wasn't able to get good air off the car in front of them, they just seemed to struggle with their handling. And it kind of set up a relatively calm ending in the race. The top 8 drivers, they broke away in a single file line and rode around till the white flag fell. And as soon as it did, you did have Daniel Hemric try to make a move to get the race win. He dives to the inside, starts working his way, up close to second place. Don't know if he would have gotten much further than that, but that momentum ended for him when Josh Berry made a move back to the inside. I don't know whether it was to block Daniel or try to get a push from him to get around Austin Hill, who was leading. But either way, it really stalled out Hemric. Him and Josh Berry ended up racing side by side to the line. It allowed Austin Hill to come away with his second win on the season. And Austin, again, shows his strength on these super speedway style races racetracks. He gets the second win of the season, and in the super speedway races, he had the win at Daytona, finished second at the March race in Atlanta. While he did finish 27th at Talladega in the spring, he did lead 67 laps that day and was definitely one of the stronger cars in the field. So, you kind of take that finish with a grain of salt, but he was able to get the win. He's from Georgia. It was a big home track win for him. He was excited for that. And Austin has really quietly been on quite a tear in the past 7 races, starting at Darlington. In 7 races, he's been able to get 6 top 10s and 4 top 5s, and then this win Saturday at Atlanta. So he's definitely picked up his consistency, able to just quietly, chip away, kind of solidify his position in the point standings. And if he finishes high enough up there, just getting himself more playoff points. And another driver who's been impressive in that stretch is Josh Berry, who finished second Saturday. He has 5 top 10s in that same stretch, 7 races, 5 top 10s, 4 top 5s, and a win. So those two guys are definitely getting hot as we get closer to the playoffs and just quietly picking up those points. The way the top 10 looked once the checkered flag fell, you had Austin Hill getting the win, Josh Berry second. Ryan Truex was able to finish third, followed by Tyler Reddick in fourth. Daniel Hemric, he came away with a 5th place finish, followed by Noah Gragson in 6th. Justin Allgaier in 7th. Landon Castle in 8th. Riley Herbst in 9th, and AJ Allmendinger would round out the top 10. And there at the end, I was pulling for Truex to come away with the win. This wasn't a scheduled start for him with Joe Gibbs Racing, but he was able to get some sponsorship from Auto Owners Insurance, his brother Martin's sponsor, and he definitely made the most of it. Was able to finish out a race, running up front most of it, compared to his other races with Joe Gibbs, where he would have good runs, just struggle to finish things, kind of not of his own doing, would catch up with him, and he would be unable to finish. So, and he mentioned in his post-race interview, unless something comes together with sponsorship, this was probably his last race of the season. So hopefully they can get something to materialize, get him some more starts, whether it's for Joe Gibbs. I don't know what the rest of their schedule looks like in that 18 car, or maybe he can get some starts with Sam Hunt Racing. Who knows? But Ryan is another one of those guys, like many of them now in the field. He's got the talent. He can be a solid driver for any team, any race winning contending team. It's just all about the sponsorship money at this point, and that's really what seemed to have messed him up so far in his career. But there at the end, like I said, he was in third. He was in a Chevy sandwich, and he was really just a sitting duck. His best move was going to be just to ride where he was, I think, because if he would have got out of line, tried to make a move, I don't think he would have had anyone go with him. I think those Chevys would have stuck together and kind of settled it amongst themselves. So the best he could do was sit there in third. If somebody makes a move, maybe a wreck happens in front of him, he's able to get through it and come away with an upset win. But still, a solid third place finish for him in a race he wasn't even scheduled to be in. And really, as far as the playoff standings for the Xfinity Series going, I mean, not a whole lot of drama or any compelling storylines are building up yet. The guys, it's kind of like the Truck Series, though those below the cut line at this point, it's just not really anyone that's shown consistency to get up there and be a week in, week out race winning threat. You do have Sheldon Creed under there, but he's just had such a hard time with finishing races off. Other drivers like Brandon Brown, Jeb Burton, Brett Moffitt, Anthony Alfredo, a lot of guys who could pull the upset win. Maybe as we start winding down the regular season, maybe they can sneak through and get a win, but I just don't see it happening, at least at this point. Who knows what it will look like a couple races from now. So definitely going to be interesting to keep an eye on, see if any of these guys can start building up some momentum to make a one last push for a playoff spot for the Xfinity Series. And on Sunday with the Cup race, we had the complete opposite of Saturday's Xfinity race. The drivers, they were back in big packs, running together, drivers getting out of shape, a lot of cars sliding around. We had a couple big wrecks. Looking at the stats from this race, in the spring, you had 46 lead changes compared to this summer's race. In July, you had 27. Now, there was 100 miles less racing in Sunday's race compared to the spring. They ran 500 miles, whereas on Sunday they raced 400. But we did see an increase in cautions. There were 13 cautions Sunday compared to 11 back in the spring. So drivers still going for it. A lot of mistakes being made, and drivers getting caught up in big wrecks. The main one, it seemed like at the center of these wrecks, was Ross Chastain. It was another rough week for him as far as get his reputation amongst his peers and NASCAR Nation. On the first big wreck of the day in early in stage 2, you had Ross pushing Martin Truex Jr. into turns 1 and 2. He wasn't right on the bumper. I went back and watched the replay. He did have some space between them, but it's like as he went the corner, he got a run and went to the outside. I don't know whether it was to get air on his nose or if he was just looking up there to see if maybe a pass could be made, but it was enough to get Martin out of shape. Ross, he was off center of his bumper. Martin spins around, gets loose, and it collects, quite a few drivers, and good drivers. You had Austin Dillon with a hard lick into the wall. He got tagged by Michael McDowell coming down the track, and it sent him into the outside wall. You also had Joey Logano and Kyle Busch. Logano getting hit hard in the driver's side. Right side tires went up in the air for a brief moment. As I said, Michael McDowell, he was involved with some minimal damage. Kyle Larson, he gets spun out and winds up hitting the outside wall head on. Thought that was Kyle Larson's day, I should say. I thought that was his day done. I figured with that hit, that damage, he wouldn't be able to continue. But as we will discuss here later in the show, he was not done yet. Austin was probably the most vocal out of all the drivers after the wreck. He let it be known that he was not happy with Ross. Basically said it just seems like, yet again, a casualty of Ross Chastain. And that was not the end of Ross's day as far as controversy, I guess you could say. You had him mixing it up with Denny Hamlin again after they've had a couple incidents at Gateway earlier in the year. And going back and watching the replay, early in stage 1, Ross, he gets a little loose going into turn 3, and he was in front of Denny. Denny makes, just slight contact with his rear corner panel, and it sends Ross even more out of shape and out of the groove. And I don't know if that might have been still in Ross's head when this next incident occurred, but it was definitely interesting to see that part going back and rewatching it. I didn't catch it before. Real late in the race, 15 laps to go, Denny, he gets spun by Ross, and this was a late caution. Denny, after the race, he said basically everyone has a different tolerance level, and Denny says he has reached his peak. That was after being asked, is Ross truly a championship contender after all the drivers he's made, upset over this course of this season? And that's an excellent question, because he has had so many run-ins with so many drivers. You got to think, payback in some shape, form, or fashion is going to be coming for him in the playoffs. These guys are not going to make it easy for him, especially if he keeps racing like this. In Ross's comments, he says that he feels like this incident was different from Gateway. He does have Denny Hamlin's phone number, so he'll reach out and talk to him. And he said he would own up to the wreck with Denny if he felt like it was as reckless as Gateway was, or if if the wreck was reckless. He said his car was simply tight after damage from that first big wreck early in the race with Martin Truex Jr. But still, going back and watch the replay, and I kind of agree with Jeff Burton on the broadcast where he said, you got a gas pedal. Your car isn't handling the way it should be or as good as it was. You got to learn to kind of back off and regather yourself and not risk damaging yourself worse or taking out somebody else. And that's kind of been Ross's MO as a racer over any, series. He's a very aggressive driver. He's not one to lift off the gas. So I'm not sure what the end game for Ross will be this season. As I said, it's going to be interesting to see, especially with some of these guys he's mixed it up with who maybe not make the playoffs. And, if they're battling it out for a position with Ross, are they going to give him a little tap, send him up the track, or are they going to hold him up? It just seems like in the long run, it is not going to pay well for Ross. He does have a team owner, Justin Marks, who is standing firm behind him. And I wouldn't label Ross a dirty driver by any means. Is he very aggressive? Yes. But I wouldn't label him dirty yet. I'd like seeing him race with that aggression. It is refreshing to see. and just especially with the attitude he keeps, which is basically, for the most part, some of the time he can go on an apology tour, but for the most part, he'll own up to it. So that he's going for the win. He's going for every position he can. He has had to fight and claw to get the position he is now. So he is not going to take these situations lightly, and he's going to make the most of it. But after that wreck with Denny Hamlin, it set us up. We had another incident before we got to the white flag, which set up a late race restart. And you actually had Corey LaJoy up there restarting with inside 5 to go in the lead and able to hold the lead on the restart. And it was looking like we were going to have the biggest upset, at least in a good while for this series, especially this late in the season. And I was pulling for Corey just mainly because Corey has not been able to find himself at least this close to a position to win. He's had some good runs at the super speedway tracks. He's mostly driven for underfunded teams and has had decent results with it and has shown flashes of his ability to get up there and race hard with some big names. But on that restart, Chase Elliott, he was able to get around Corey and hold on to the lead as they took the white flag. And as they're going into turn one, Corey gets a push from behind and he gets a good run, makes a move to the outside, and Chase goes up in kind of a late block, but goes up to block him, kind of runs him up the track, and Corey makes contact with the wall, gets in a big wreck, and including Kurt Busch in this one, and just ends his day immediately. Caution comes out. The race is official. It's Chase Elliott that came away with the win. And before we get into breaking down that last incident, the top 10, you had Chase finish first. Ross Chastain came away with second. Austin Cindric in third. He continues his strong run, his hot streak he's had. Erik Jones, he finishes fourth, followed by Ryan Blaney in fifth. Daniel Suarez finishes in sixth, followed by Justin Haley in seventh. Aric Almirola finishes in eighth, followed by Cole Custer in ninth, and Harrison Burton gets his first career top 10, finishing in the 10th position. And the block that Chase put on Corey, I'm not going to say it was, over the top. It's the end of the race. Chase had to do what he had to do to get the win, to try and protect that lead. Everyone was kind of comparing it to the deal in California with Larson. And, while I may not like the block, it's not because I think it was dirty by any means, and comparing it to California, I don't think it's kind of oranges and apples as far as what happened. At California, you had Kyle, run Chase from pretty much the lower lane to middle of the track all the way up to the wall. Twice he ran him up there. So, and this is with, this wasn't like the white flag lap where it happened. So it's not, to me, this even close to the same incident. Even Corey said after the race, second didn't matter. Second wasn't going to do anything for him. He's got to go for the win. And there were he had no hard feelings for Chase with what he did. He said Chase had to do what he had to do to get the win. And, Ross is right. Second place wasn't going to do anything for him. It's not like he's a Ross Chastain who's up there in contention week in and week out. Right now he is 31st in points. He needs to be in the top 30. If he gets that win, maybe he gets in the top 30 in points. Would he be able to hold it? It is a whole entirely different discussion. And I replied to Twitter account. I can't. I believe it's Darren. I may be, just butchering his last name. Gilliam. Is Black Flags Matter. He's does a lot of YouTube videos. He's in and out of the track, in and out, in the sport. He had put, I forget exactly what his tweet was, but I replied I was not a fan of either the California block or the Atlanta block. Mainly Atlanta, just because you hated to see that happen to Corey because he doesn't find himself in that position often. So, and to see it in for him like that, where he doesn't even come away with a second place finish, it's a little disheartening. But somebody replied to me and was saying, well, Corey, that would just be basically a wasted playoff spot. And while I don't disagree with that, if he even would have been able to make it in the playoffs, just to have Corey be able to break through, get in victory lane, get eyes on him and his ability, that would be huge for his career. So That was my whole deal with the block. It's just mainly I hated to see it in like that for Corey in that way. And looking at the race, it was a pretty disappointing crowd in the stands, and I would have to chalk it up to the heat. I mean, it's July in Atlanta, Georgia. It's not going to be cool by any stretch of the imagination. I think NASCAR would be better served to maybe next year try this race at night, or at least a late afternoon that will transition into a nighttime race, just to try and give the fans some relief, the spotters some relief who are up there on top of that stand, the pit crews, everyone involved, just to try and get what relief you can in a July race. So, I would say try that next year. The schedule should be coming out here in the next month or two. Maybe they will do that, set it for a later start. But I think that would help with your ticket sales if it was moved to a night race. But and bouncing back real quick to Corey before we finish up talking about the Cup race, I think with this performance today, he's definitely going to be one that TV and the media is going to be highlighting when the series rolls back around to Daytona and the regular season finale. He's always had good runs at super speedways, as I've said before, and with this run he had in Atlanta, it's just going to kind of highlight him even better for Daytona. So I think he's put himself in a dark horse running for Daytona, along with guys like Michael McDowell, who won the Daytona 500 last year, Bubba, who won at Talladega and is a great, super speedway racer, and as well as the Chris Buescher and Brad Keselowski, who won the duels earlier this season. It's going to be interesting to see if one of those guys will be able to punch through, kind of seal that late season upset and get themselves in the playoffs, and see who that would boot out really when all's said and done. Now, before we get into next weekend's action at New Hampshire International Speedway, let's go over our spotlight drivers from Atlanta and Mid Ohio. Guys who didn't come away with a trophy, but they definitely got a much needed solid finish, able to, whether it's break out of their slump, overcome any damage they received during the race, or able to make the most out of what equipment they had. And starting out, our spotlight drivers in Mid Ohio was Kaz Gralla. He got his first top 10 of the season. And Kaz is one of those guys that, kind of like Ryan Truex, who I mentioned earlier, he hadn't been able to have a real good break yet in the sport. He's still a young driver. He's only ran one full-time season across all three series, and that was in the Truck Series in 2017. He won at Daytona that year, came close to winning a second race before being spun out by Austin Cindric. And he has shown flashes throughout his career, but just has been unable to secure funding or a full-time ride to really show off his talents. So Kaz able to come away with a solid top 10 finish. And in the Xfinity series, my spotlight driver is Daniel Hemric. And the reason it's Daniel is because he was the only driver at the end to really go for the win and try to snatch the lead away from Austin Hill. This is only his second top 5 of the season, his first since Las Vegas, which was the third race of the season. And coming off a championship season last year, he was, I'm sure, definitely hoping for more at this point in the season, but he definitely took a step in the right direction, try and right that ship with a top 5 finish. So hopefully that is a sign of things to come for him in the rest of his season with Colleague Racing. And on the Cup Series, this was a tough decision for me. I have a couple honorable mentions from me. Martin Truex Jr. was one driver I considered naming a spotlight driver. Being able to come back and finish in 11th place after being spun out with that incident with Ross Chastain early in the race. Another driver I was considering was Harrison Burton, who came away with his first top 10 finish of his career in the Cup Series, able to keep himself out of trouble and come away with a solid finish, avoid everyone else's messes. But the spotlight driver is going to go to Kyle Larson, mainly for being able to even continue racing after the wreck that involved Martin Truex Jr. He got spun up into the outside wall in the back straightaway. He made some pretty good contact with the front of his car. I figured that was his race over and done with there. He was going to be going to the garage, but he was able to continue. No real damage to the car as far as mechanically. Avoided, all the other wrecks and spins that we had throughout the race, especially the last lap deal with Corey LaJoy, and come away with a 13th place finish. So hats off to him, his crew, for being able to fix that car, and keep it in a decent race condition and able to avoid really, falling out of the race. So good job to them. And he is my spotlight driver for the Cup Series. And looking ahead to this upcoming weekend's race at New Hampshire, the Magic Mile, you have the defending winner from last year, Aric Almirola, who won the Cup race. And he had a pretty solid car last year. There was no fluke win for him. He's going to be looking to repeat. Obviously, completely different car this season. Will he be able to? That's going to be one thing he has to overcome. And, for the Cup Series, it's really been a veterans track. New Hampshire has. You have had some first-time winners like Robbie Gordon back in 2001 with the controversial finish with Jeff Gordon there at the end. Ryan Newman was able to get his first career win in 2002 with a rain-shortened victory. Clint Boyer, 2010, he gets his first career win there in the 07 for Richard Childress. And then Joey Logano, driving the 20 for Joe Gibbs Racing, gets his first career win in another rain-shortened race. So it isn't out of the question that somebody might be able to come away with their first career victory. But other than that, this has been mainly a veterans track owned by drivers like Brad Keselowski, Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin. These are guys that are constantly running up front and in contention for the wins at this track. So, if it turns into a fuel mileage race like this place can turn into every now and then, not so much with these stages. But if it does, you very well could see someone try to stretch the fuel and get a win. And one of those guys that might be solid that, I wouldn't sleep on for the Cup Series is Christopher Bell. And the reason I say that is because over in the Xfinity Series, he is the defending winner at this track, and he won this race 3 times in a row the past 3 seasons for the Xfinity Series. So he knows how to get around New Hampshire. He's, quietly having a good year, solid year. People are definitely expecting a lot of Christopher to finally break through, kind of like William Byron did earlier this season, start getting some multiple win seasons. And he could take that step this coming Sunday at New Hampshire. On the Xfinity side, obviously, as far as I know, he will not be in this race to defend his race win. The driver to watch is going to be Justin Allgaier. And this is, this type of track is right in, his breadbasket. This is his kind of racetrack, kind of like Phoenix is, flat track. It's a good deal for him. He's had good finishes there while Christopher Bell's been winning. He's been getting top 5s, top 3 finishes. So to me, I think Allgaier goes into this weekend as a favorite. And, my main concern with the Cup Series side is this race going to go kind of like Martinsville and Phoenix and Richmond? Like it's a flat track. Is shifting going to play a big factor into it and kind of limit passing? We shall see. I hope not. New Hampshire is not known for their, exciting photo finishes, battling to the end. But you definitely have some positive feelings, of what could be with this new car. So time will tell. We'll find out soon enough. And before we close out the show, some exciting developments for this podcast. You can find this podcast on Apple, Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, Stitcher. Well, now we are on Amazon Music. So if you have the Amazon Music app, you can go to it now. You can search 3 Wide and you will be able to find me and subscribe to my show if you haven't already on any other podcast platforms. As I said, you can also find me on anchor.fm/3wide3. And as far as the YouTube channel is going, I'm definitely on the end rows for getting this edited and put out. I got a few more things I have to do as far as in my studio/shed, trying to get some things finished up in here so I can start recording, put some final touches on the video before it's released. So hopefully within the next week, by next weekend at the latest, that video should be out, and we'll be, putting that out for everyone to see. So other than that, it's definitely, we're moving along with this show. I appreciate everyone listening along, and every listen, it means a lot to me. So thank y'all for joining each and every episode. And that will wrap up this week's episode of 3 Wide. As always, thank you for joining me and listening along. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week as we get ready to head to the Magic Mile in New Hampshire and see who comes away with the victory. We'll be back same time next week and go over all the action from the weekend's race events.